Have
It
something
started
for you.
quietly, the kind of story that sneaks up on you when you're not paying attention. I had just moved into a small apartment complex at the edge of town, a place where the walls were thin, the neighbors polite, and everyone pretended not to notice each other. Everyone except her, Mrs. Carter. She lived right next door. A 40-year-old woman with that effortless kind of beauty, long black hair that always seemed freshly brushed, soft laugh lines that made her smile look lived in, and the kind of posture that said she'd learned how to carry herself with dignity long before I ever knew what that meant. Her presence was calm, magnetic, the kind that made silence feel full instead of empty. The first time we met, she was standing by her porch watering a row of potted plants. The sun hit her just right, catching the faint shimmer of her gold bracelet. She looked up, smiled, and said, "You must be the new tenant." Her voice had this low, velvety tone, mature but warm, and I swear for a second I forgot how to speak. I nodded, stammering something about how nice the neighborhood seemed. She just smiled, eyes narrowing playfully, and said, "It's quiet most of the time." There was a flicker of something in her expression, then a kind of restrained amusement, like she was used to keeping secrets. That became our rhythm over the next few weeks. Passing glances through windows, small talk at the mailbox, the occasional wave when she drove past in her white SUV. Nothing extraordinary, at least not to anyone else. But to me, every brief exchange carried something I couldn't name, a quiet pull like gravity. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear faint music from her house, old love songs, the kind people dance to in their living rooms when no one's watching. Sometimes laughter, other nights, silence. But even that silence carried weight. One afternoon, I caught her sitting on her front steps with a cup of coffee, staring into the distance. Her husband's car wasn't there. I'd noticed he rarely was. Without thinking, I walked over, offering to fix the fence post between our yards. She looked up, surprised at first, then smiled softly. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I replied, "but maybe I want to." For a moment, she just looked at me, really looked like she was seeing me for the first time, not as a neighbor, but as something else entirely. Her gaze lingered a second too long before she nodded, voice quieter this time. "All right, but only if you call me Emma." Her name lingered on my tongue longer than it should have. And for reasons I couldn't explain, Mrs. Carter suddenly felt like a title she no longer wanted, and one I wasn't meant to use. That was the moment the air shifted, the quiet beginning of something neither of us expected. After that afternoon, things between us changed in ways that felt too subtle to explain, but too real to ignore. Calling her Emma felt strange at first, almost dangerous, like breaking some unspoken rule. But once I did, she started looking at me differently. Every conversation carried this quiet tension now. Her words were the same, but her tone wasn't. When she'd laugh, it lasted a little longer. When her hand brushed mine, even by accident, she didn't pull away as quickly as she used to. She invited me over one Saturday to thank me for helping with the fence. Said she made too much pasta and couldn't let it go to waste. I told myself it was just dinner between neighbors, but the second I stepped in her kitchen, I knew better. The air smelled like rosemary and garlic, warm and comforting, but beneath it was something softer, her perfume. She wore a simple off-shoulder cream sweater, hair tied loosely, a few strands framing her face. It wasn't about how she looked, it was how she carried herself. Relaxed, unhurried, confident. We talked about everything, music, books, even the weather. She told me how she used to love painting before life got too busy. I told her how I'd moved here to find some space to breathe. For a while, it almost felt normal. Then she said quietly, "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who made me feel seen." The way she said seen hit harder than it should have. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something vulnerable behind them, something she probably didn't let anyone else see. The sound of the clock ticking filled the pause between us. She looked away, then reached for her wine glass, her fingers trembling just slightly. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said, barely above a whisper. "Like what?" I asked. "Like you're trying to read my mind." I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. "Maybe I already am." Her lips curved into the faintest smirk, the kind that said she was torn between amusement and guilt. "You're too young to play this game. Then maybe stop making it feel like one," I said softly. She froze. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The world outside went quiet. No cars, no wind, nothing. Just the faint hum of electricity and the tension thick enough to touch. She stood then, gathering the plates, breaking eye contact. "I think that's enough for tonight," she murmured. I stood too, but didn't leave right away. She turned toward me, her breath catching as I said quietly, "You told me not to call you Mrs. Carter, but if I can't call you that, what should I call you?" Her answer came with a soft, uncertain smile. "For now, just call me Emma." And the way she said it, slow, deliberate, trembling on the edge of restraint, made me realize this wasn't just temptation anymore. It was the start of a boundary neither of us could keep pretending existed. After that dinner, the distance between us became something fragile, a thread stretched thin, ready to snap with the smallest pull. Days passed, but the air between our doors always carried something unspoken. I'd see her in the mornings, stepping out to grab her mail in a loose gray robe, coffee steaming in her hand. She'd catch me glancing, pretend not to notice, though the faint curve of her lips gave her away every time. Other days, she'd find excuses to talk, borrowing sugar, asking if I could check a light that flickered in her hallway. Small things, but each one felt like an invitation wrapped in normalcy. One rainy afternoon, she knocked on my door, said the power was out in her living room. When I followed her inside, thunder rolled softly outside, and the smell of rain filled the air. The house felt dim, quiet, like it was holding its breath. She stood near the window, arms crossed lightly, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder. "I can't figure out what's wrong," she said. I crouched beside the outlet, checking the wiring, trying to focus on the task, but my thoughts kept circling back to the sound of her breathing behind me. Slow, measured. When I turned, our eyes met, and something in the air shifted. There was no careful distance now. No naveriton. Just the weight of two people standing too close, realizing how far they'd already crossed without moving an inch. "You don't have to help with everything, you know," she said softly. "I know," I replied, "but I want to." Her lips parted, like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Instead, she took a step closer. The space between us shrank until I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin. "You should go," she whispered, voice trembling. "Do you want me to?" I asked. Silence. Then, the faintest shake of her head. Her hand brushed mine, just barely, but it was enough. The softest touch, yet it felt like a spark had found its way into the room. Every sound seemed to fade. The rain, the thunder, the ticking clock. There was only her, the faint scent of jasmine from her hair, the warmth radiating off her skin, the quiet tension threading between our hearts. She drew in a breath, eyes flicking to my lips before she quickly stepped back, clutching her cardigan tighter. "This isn't right," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "I know," I said gently, "but tell me you don't feel it too." Her silence said everything. Her eyes were glassy, conflicted, full of emotions she'd spent years burying. Finally, she said, "You should go before I forget I'm supposed to say no." So I left, but that moment stayed, burning quietly between us like the last glow of a match that refused to die. That was the day the line blurred, when pretending it was just friendship became impossible. After that stormy afternoon, everything changed, though neither of us dared to admit it out loud. What had once been polite conversation now carried a quiet electricity. Every good morning, every accidental touch when she passed me the mail, every glance that lingered a moment too long, it all meant something more. She started avoiding eye contact at first. When she'd see me outside, she'd pretend to be on the phone, her voice tight and hurried. But then I'd catch her looking when she thought I wasn't paying attention, those deep brown eyes betraying her calm composure. One evening, I found her standing by her car, keys in hand, frowning at a tire that had gone flat. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. I offered to fix it. She hesitated, then sighed softly, handing me the jack. "You shouldn't always come to my rescue," she said. Maybe I just like having an excuse to see you, I replied without thinking. Her eyes flicked to mine, surprised, amused, and a little afraid. Careful, she said, but her voice wasn't warning me. It was warning herself. As I worked, she sat on the porch steps, her hands folded neatly on her lap. The breeze played with her hair, and the fading sunlight caught the fine lines by her eyes. Not flaws, but traces of a life lived fully. There was something magnetic about her quiet strength, about how she carried herself like she'd seen storms worse than this, and still stood tall. When I finished, she thanked me, but her voice was softer now. You really shouldn't be this kind, she murmured. It makes it hard to forget you're not mine to think about. The words hit harder than she realized. I stood there, unsure if I should speak. But then she looked away, blinking fast, like she regretted saying it. I didn't mean, she began. You did, I interrupted gently. You just wish you didn't. Her breath caught. For a long moment, we stood in that golden hour silence, the kind that feels too delicate to break. I could feel her battling something inside, the weight of her vows, her image, the world's judgment pressing down on her shoulders. When she finally spoke again, her voice was unsteady. You don't understand. My husband, he's a good man, just not the right one anymore. And that makes me feel human, I said softly. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She didn't smile, didn't move, just looked. It felt like she was searching for something in me she wasn't allowed to want, but couldn't stop needing. Then, just as the moment was about to shatter, the porch light flickered on. Reality came rushing back. She straightened, stepped back, and said quietly, "Thank you for fixing it." Her tone was polite again, controlled, but her eyes, they told a different story. That night, I couldn't sleep, because I knew her walls weren't gone, but they were cracking, one look, one touch at a time. Days turned into quiet tests of restraint. The more I tried to act normal, the more impossible it became. Every time she passed by my door, I could sense it, that same energy pulsing faintly between us like gravity pulling two objects that shouldn't collide but inevitably would. It was late one evening when everything finally slipped. The sky had that burnt orange glow of early summer, and the scent of fresh-cut grass drifted through the neighborhood. I was sitting on my porch steps when her door opened. She stood there for a moment, framed by the warm light inside her house, wearing a loose beige cardigan and jeans, her hair down for once, softer, freer. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her tone wasn't formal, not neighborly. It was something else, something trembling beneath the surface. I nodded, and she walked over, stopping halfway between our porches. For a while, neither of us said anything. The cicadas hummed. The air felt thick with everything we'd been avoiding. Finally, she spoke. "You've made this very hard for me." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She exhaled, glancing at the ground before meeting my eyes again. "You're kind. You listen. You notice things I thought no one noticed anymore. You make me feel seen. And I hate that I can't stop thinking about that." The words hung there, fragile and heavy. I didn't interrupt. I couldn't. I watched her fingers tighten around the edge of her cardigan, watched the way her jaw tensed like she was fighting herself. "I've been married for 15 years, she said softly. "And in all that time, I've never once thought about someone else like this. Until you." My heart was pounding. Every part of me wanted to move closer, to say something, to tell her it was okay to feel what she felt. But I stayed still. She wasn't confessing to get comfort. She was confessing to free herself from silence. After a long pause, I said quietly, "Maybe you're just remembering what it feels like to be alive again." Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in realization. She blinked a few times, as if steadying herself. "That's what scares me," she whispered, "because I shouldn't need someone else to feel that." "You don't," I said. "You just needed someone to remind you that you still can." She stepped closer, so close I could see the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes. The porch light cast a soft glow on her face, outlining every detail. The warmth of her skin, the quiet ache in her expression, the faint tremble in her lower lip. "I told myself this would fade," she said. "That I'd stop wanting to hear your voice through the wall, stop waiting for you to come home." Her voice trailed off, and for a heartbeat, she looked at me. Really looked. Then, barely above a whisper. Tell me I'm not crazy for feeling this. You're not crazy, I said. You're just finally being honest. For a long, silent moment, the world felt still. Then she turned, voice trembling as she said, I need time. But as she walked away, I knew time wasn't going to undo what had already begun. The silence after that night was heavier than ever. She stopped coming out in the mornings. No more polite greetings across the fence. No more small talk about the weather or the mail. Even the lights from her kitchen, the ones that used to glow late into the night, stayed dark. I told myself to leave it alone, to respect her space. But part of me knew she wasn't just avoiding me. She was fighting herself, fighting what we both knew was real. 3 nights later, I heard it, the faint knock on my door around midnight. When I opened it, she stood there in a soft gray sweater and loose jeans, her hair damp as if she'd just showered. The porch light cast a golden hue on her skin, catching the nervous flicker in her eyes. I couldn't sleep, she said. I needed to talk. There was no hesitation in my voice when I stepped aside and said, Come in. She walked past me, her perfume faint but familiar, a warm, clean scent that felt like home and danger all at once. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly, as if holding herself together. I thought I could control it, she said quietly. The way I look at you, the way my heart reacts when you smile. But the harder I try, the worse it gets. I sat across from her, careful, steady. You don't have to control everything, I said. Her eyes lifted to mine, soft, searching, tired. You don't understand, she said. Every time I think of you, I feel young again. And that scares me, because I spent years convincing myself that part of me was gone for good. I leaned forward slightly. Then maybe it's not gone. Maybe it just needed someone to remind you it was still there. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I'll believe you. Her eyes glistened as she said it. Half a confession, half a surrender. The room felt smaller now, the air charged and quiet. I could see the pulse in her neck, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she exhaled. When I reached out and touched her hand, she didn't pull away this time. Her skin was warm, soft, trembling under my fingertips. The smallest contact, but it sent a ripple through the space between us, a silent acknowledgement that the pretending was over. I don't know what this means, she whispered. It doesn't have to mean anything right now, I said. It just has to be real. Her lips parted, not for words but for breath. She looked down at our hands, then back at me, and for once didn't look away. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves rustled across the porch. Inside, everything was still, except for the quiet rhythm of 2 people finally letting the walls fall. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I can't promise where this goes. Then don't, I said softly. Just promise you'll stop pretending it isn't there. And for the first time, she smiled, a small, broken, beautiful smile that said everything words couldn't. The next morning carried an unfamiliar stillness, not the kind that follows regret, but the quiet that comes after a storm finally spends itself. The air felt lighter, clearer. Even the sunlight seemed softer as it slipped through the blinds and painted faint golden lines across the floor. She was sitting by the window when I woke, wrapped in her light sweater, knees drawn up slightly, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Her hair was loose, tousled, catching the morning light in strands of deep black. She wasn't trying to hide anymore. She wasn't wearing the armor of Mrs. Harrison, the polite neighbor or the woman who always held herself at a careful distance. She was just her. When she turned to look at me, there was something different in her eyes. Not guilt, not even confusion, just calm, the quiet understanding of someone who has stopped running from what she feels. I thought I'd regret coming here, she said softly. But I don't. I moved closer, sitting across from her. Why would you? She let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. Because for years, I've done everything right. I've stayed where people expected me to stay, smiled when I was supposed to smile. And yet last night, it was the first time I actually felt alive in a long time. Her words hung in the air, fragile but true. There was no grand declaration between us, no promises about forever. Just honesty, raw and unfiltered. I reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch. That simple gesture said everything. That she trusted me, that she wasn't hiding anymore, that the distance we once guarded had vanished. But reality has a way of finding its way back, even into the quietest mornings. Her phone buzzed on the table. A name flashed across the screen, David. Her husband. She didn't move to answer it, just stared at it for a long, silent moment, the faint ache returning to her eyes. I can't keep lying, she said finally. I know. She looked at me then, really looked, and her voice trembled. But I also can't go back to pretending none of this ever happened. We sat in that truth together. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room, each second pulling us closer to whatever came next. She reached for my hand, fingers lacing through mine, her grip firm but gentle. Whatever happens after this, thank you, she said, for reminding me I'm still capable of feeling something real. I didn't try to stop her when she stood up. Didn't ask her to stay. Love, real love, doesn't trap someone in a moment. It sets them free to face what they've been avoiding. She walked to the door, paused, and turned back one last time. A small, brave smile curved her lips. Don't call me Mrs. anymore. And just like that, she was gone. But even as the door closed behind her, I knew the story wasn't ending. It was changing. What we shared wasn't just a forbidden spark. It was a reminder that even the most guarded hearts can find warmth again. That sometimes love isn't about possession, it's about awakening. The storm had passed, but she'd left her sunlight behind.